Story 1. I'm a fan of anything nature-related, and Planet Earth 2 is pure visual poetry. That scene with the baby iguanas trying to escape the snakes is truly breathtaking. Story 2. Fog of War. An interview with Robert McNamara that is terrifying. Story 3. The program on Netflix is probably one of my favorite documentaries I have seen. It's about a so-called behavioral correction boarding school, which actually abused kids while making their parents pay a fortune. The topic is both heartbreaking and fascinating, but what made me love it so much was the person behind it. The woman who created it didn't set out to make it for the world to see. She had a passion for film, a deep hatred for that school, and originally started the documentary to convince her father that what she went through was real and one of the most traumatic experiences of her life. As she kept digging, she uncovered many shocking things and eventually realized that everyone needed to know about this. The way it is crafted feels genuine and heartfelt. Story 4. There is a documentary on Netflix about Woodstock 1999, a massive multi-day festival with around 250,000 young people. It went wrong in ways you wouldn't believe, ending with people tearing down the infrastructure and setting the whole place on fire. The chaos leading up to that moment is mind-blowing. It lasted just a few days, but it felt like a full-on revolution against authority, so wild and entertaining. I highly recommend it. Additionally, I watched a documentary about a sperm donor who has fathered over 1,000 children. It has become a significant issue due to the high risk of accidental incest among half-siblings who may not even know they are related. It is definitely a crazy, eye-opening watch. Story 5. When the levees broke during Hurricane Katrina, many individuals took the opportunity to traumatize others significantly. Story 6. Spike Lee's When the Levees Broke, a requiem in 4 acts, explores Hurricane Katrina. It is perhaps the most powerful film I have ever seen, profoundly changing my perspective on racism, the United States, and the world around me. It is devastating to watch, but it is something we should all witness. From a quality perspective, you couldn't ask for more. Story 7. I was always willing to be reasonable until I had to be unreasonable. Sometimes reasonable people must do unreasonable things. Story 8. Black Metal Veins. It provides a dark and unfiltered look at heroin addiction, discussing abuse and the reasons for usage, including the act of injecting heroin and its negative effects. One of the individuals featured dies halfway through, and there is an uncensored depiction of an addict injecting heroin into her abdomen to terminate her unborn child. Story 9. The Keepers on Netflix is a series I saw years ago and still think about to this day. It's about a nun and school teacher who was murdered in the 1960s or 1970s in Baltimore. I live in Maryland as well, so that may be why it is so impactful to me. Story 10. Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father. It is not a feel-good one at all, but it is quite mind-blowing. Story 11. Dominion is a documentary about industrial animal agriculture. It is by far the most eye-opening documentary I have ever seen. A must-watch for everyone. Story 12. Walking with Monsters. Life Before Dinosaurs by BBC explores the first life underwater. Story 13. I just finished watching Sugarcane. If you have believed the right-wing denialism about residential schools, it's time to see the truth. Then consider why people would deny it, what they stand to gain, and how their denials are framed to shape the way you feel about others, stripping them of their humanity. Story 14. The Imposter, 2012, is about a con artist in Spain who convinces a family in Texas that he is their missing son and brother. Reflecting on this documentary, I still question whether the con artist truly deceived them, or whether the family was using him to cover up what really happened to their missing son and brother. Story 15. Killer Inside. The mind of Aaron Hernandez was very interesting, filled with many twists and turns. It is probably the most captivating documentary I have watched recently. Story 16. Don't Think I've Forgotten. Cambodia's Lost Rock and Roll. This work explores the rise and downfall of the vibrant musical culture in Cambodia. Story 17. Murder on a Sunday Morning. A wrongly accused black teenager charged with murdering a white woman in Jacksonville, Florida. Story 18. Jodorowsky's Dune 2013. A visionary Chilean film director attempted to make Dune in the mid-1970s. He assembled the following team: Mobius storyboard artist, Dan O'Bannon art director and special effects, H.R. Geiger art and design for the House of Harkonnen, Pink Floyd soundtrack for House Atreides, Salvador Dali Emperor of the Universe, Orson Welles The Baron, Mick Jagger Fate. If he had secured funding, this film would have premiered before Star Wars: A New Hope. When the project fell through, O'Bannon and Geiger went on to influence many iconic science fiction movies. Story 19. It's about a group of climbers attempting to scale the rock face of Mount Meru in Tanzania. There have been several attempts over the years by many professional climbers, but none have been successful. The film is intense and well made. Story 20. OJ, Made in America, is one of the best documentaries I have ever seen. It won the Academy Award for Best Documentary the year it was released. It is about much more than him. It showcases America's obsession with celebrity and the complexity of the racial divide. It is incredible. Story 21. Idiocracy is a comedy movie that has recently been seen as a documentary due to certain events. Story 22. Russia 1985 to 1999. Trauma Zone. As a child of the 1980s, this was a mind-blowing eye-opener. We grew up with so much propaganda in the United States that the Soviet Union was portrayed as an ultra-high-tech superpower ready to annihilate us at any second. This documentary exposes how the Soviet Union and communism were crumbling during that time period, highlighting the situation almost comically. Additionally, the documentary examines the creation and rise to power of each Russian oligarch during that same period, with each one taking advantage of and profiting from the failing country and government. Story 23. Century of the Self. Story 24. The film Tower depicts the shooting that took place on the University of Texas campus in 1966. It is animated and uses a unique storytelling approach. I have always found this incident fascinating because the shooter, a Marine veteran, sought help before the event, feeling he was losing his sanity, but did not receive it. After his death, a small tumor was discovered that may have contributed to his actions. The film presents this story in a very engaging manner. Story 25. The family is essential viewing to frame our current U.S. administration and its intent. The antisocial network is critical for understanding why our culture is the way it is. Together, they provide a complete picture of how chaotic things are right now, and you are not imagining it. Story 26. Fire in Paradise. Not necessarily mind-blowing, but some of the footage is quite intense. I can't imagine being surrounded by that much fire and knowing that the main road out is clogged with traffic. Story 27. Black Tar Heroin is an impactful documentary that highlights the struggles of addiction. One of the individuals featured is Tracy, who has overcome her own drug addiction. Now sober, she actively helps others facing similar challenges. Tracy also authored a book titled The Big Fix, which focuses on harm reduction. It's worth reading for anyone interested in this important topic. Story 28. A documentary about a drag pageant in the 1960s. It is absolutely amazing. At one point, the contestants discuss their feelings about Vietnam and the draft. It is one of the most interesting pieces of media I have ever seen. Initially, I thought it was a modern art film with a progressive agenda. However, it is simply a real documentary, reminiscent of the real world 25 years before its time and much more honest. Story 29. Murder by Proxy. How America Went Postal. A deep dive into workplace and school shootings. Warning: this content is very dark but unforgettable, like the survivor who, during her interview, genuinely understood why her coworker killed management. Story 30. Dear Zachary is the saddest and most compelling documentary I have ever seen. I sobbed while watching it. Story 31. Act of Killing is the absolute definition of mind-blowing. It is about the Indonesian mass killings of 1965 to 66, but it follows former death squad members as they recreate their actions during the purge. It is fascinating and haunting how matter-of-fact the whole thing is. Story 32. I really enjoyed Crip Camp. It's about a summer camp for people with disabilities in the 1970s and follows how some campers became significant figures in the disability rights movement in the United States. The stories are amazing. It was nominated for an Academy Award. Story 33, Valley Uprising. It's about rock climbing, specifically half-dome wall climbing. Those individuals are quite daring. Story 34, The Imposter. I won't even rant or rave about it. Just watch it. Don't look it up, don't read the Wikipedia or even a blurb. The less you know going in, the better. It's one of the best thriller documentaries I've ever seen. Story 35, The Last Stop. It is not for the faint of heart, but it sheds a lot of light on the troubled teen industry and one of the worst organizations in the business. I also recommend the online webcomic Joe vs. Elon School as a separate read. It is astonishing how long the school went undetected before Reddit helped shut it down. Story 36, The Grab, 2022. As the world becomes more interconnected and competition for resources intensifies, global conflict over food and water security is escalating. It also argues that Ukraine was invaded due to water rights. I can't unwatch it. Story 37. Overnight, or how one guy let his ego destroy his life because he got a film deal. Story 38. Missing 411. The UFO Connection 2022. This will chill you to the bone. Watch your children in national parks and federal lands. Story 39. This documentary transported me, surpassing my understanding of time and space. It made me realize how insignificant we are. Story 40. Into Eternity. Story 41. Spaceship Earth is about the people who built the biosphere and the ambitious process that led to such a project. These fascinating individuals first constructed a boat and traveled the world. They taught themselves a skill and built a large boat, which they used to sail the world for years, creating buildings to support their lifestyle along the way. As you watch, you realize they virtually built the boat through creative expression without formal education, and they accomplished more than most ever will. It is inspiring to recognize what a dedicated group can achieve without formal education and with a common goal. Story 42. Touch the Sound is about a deaf woman who can hear using her body, despite not having eardrums. The story also illustrates the physicality of sound. It's astonishing. Story 43. Scandalous. The untold story of the National Enquirer is surprisingly fascinating. There is a section that is relevant to the current state of the American media landscape. I strongly recommend it. Story 44. Anything involving cults is mind-blowing to me. The Branch Davidians and Jim Jones illustrate how people can be so brainwashed, which is fascinating. Story 45. The Moon and the Sledgehammer is an amazing documentary from 1971 about a family living in a completely different time. It is incredibly interesting and evokes unintentional folk horror vibes. Story 46. The Art of Killing. A documentary filmmaker went to Indonesia to interview local figures who speak openly about the genocide of communists they perpetrated there. These individuals are proud of their actions and have become local celebrities. They discuss openly what they did, and he even managed to meet higher-ranking individuals involved in those mass killings. First, he convinces some of them to reenact their killings, and then he persuades many others to star in a movie where they play themselves. They only realized they had been manipulated by the filmmaker long after the movie was released and gained international success. This situation highlights how much they identify with the brand of macho action heroes from 1980s and 1990s American films. After all, it was the United States that provided them with a list of supposed communists that they tortured and killed. Story 47. Must read after my death. Story 48. The Devil Next Door was jaw-dropping. It is about an Ohio man accused of being a Nazi camp guard. Don't read anything more about it and just go watch. Story 49. The Hunt is the most underrated and captivating nature documentary series I have ever seen. I highly recommend it. It is on par with Planet Earth. Story 50. Happy People. A Year in the Taiga. It is truly mind-blowing to see how fur trappers make a living in Siberia. Werner Herzog. Story 51. The Great War is an amazing documentary on the First World War made by the British Broadcasting Corporation in the 1960s. The full series is available online. Story 52. The World at War is probably the best documentary series on World War II. Story 53. 32 Sounds. For any lover of sound, music, or memory, this is essential. I have seen it 4 times, and each time I felt completely shattered by it. Originally, it was performed as a live documentary, with the audience wearing binaural headphones and the narrator and musicians performing the piece live in the room. This is how I experienced it the first 2 times. The third time I saw it at the Film Forum in New York City, again with headphones but featuring recorded narration and score. The fourth time I watched it at home on Criterion Collection. It is mind-blowing and moving, so profoundly human. I love it and recommend it at every opportunity. I also want to mention Bad Actor, a Hollywood Ponzi scheme, which manages to cover an astounding level of fraud and presents a pretty shocking twist at the end. Story 54. This is a throwback, but Baraka is best enjoyed on a large screen. I wish they would release at least a 4K version. Story 55. Chuyến đi cuối cùng của chị Phụng. Journey of Madame Phụng. Story 56. On the Adamant is a documentary about mentally ill patients gathering on a riverboat every day. It is both touching and troubling. Night and Fog is a 1956 documentary about the Holocaust. It is hard but essential. Story 57. Dirty Money on Netflix provides a good description of the messed up practices companies use against people, and it pulls no punches. Episode 5 focuses on criticizing Donald Trump's family and him for 40 minutes. I would recommend it. Story 58. Am I too European for this thread? Most of these seem like movies based on actual events. When I think about documentaries, it's more along the lines of this. Story 59. Anything Alex Gibney has ever done showcases his brilliance as a filmmaker. Some of his best works include The Crime of the Century, Going Clear, The Inventor, and Client 9. Story 60. The Queen of Trees shows the interdependent, intimate relationship between the fig tree and the fig wasp. I have never been emotionally invested in a tree. Animals, sure, but the story of this tree is incredible. A colleague introduced me to it a couple of years ago, and my partner and I have watched it 3 times already. Jaw-droppingly incredible and beautiful. It has an 8.7 rating on IMDb and is available on YouTube. Story 61. I Love the Salt of the Earth. It's about the photographer Sebastião Salgado. The documentary was made by Wim Wenders, who also created another excellent film about Ry Cooder and his son bringing together the Buena Vista Social Club, among many other great films. Story 62. Behind the Curve discusses flat earthers and conspiracy theories. The Devil We Know examines perfluorooctanoic acid and Teflon. Story 63. A Lion in the House is a documentary that closely follows children, their families, and care teams at Cincinnati Children's as they navigate the challenges of childhood cancer. My son is a childhood leukemia survivor, and this was filmed around the time he was undergoing treatment. My wife and I watched it with a box of tissues between us. The film captured the experience almost perfectly. Story 64. Free to Choose by Milton Friedman is available on YouTube. The series has 10 episodes that will change your view on economics, inflation, and more. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.